The path to mastery leads through the heart of adversity. Challenge is the raw material from which courage and strength are forged. Warriors are not defined by events. Warriors define them. Warriors conquer themselves before all else. Warriors are relentless in their service to others. Join us as we open our hearts and hone our minds to a razor's edge. It doesn't matter how slow you go, only that you do not stop. Your time is now. And now your host, Jason McKenzie.
Hey everybody, we're going to do something a little bit different on this episode of the Mental Health Warrior Show, and I don't really know how I'm going to do it. So I'm just going to do sort of a stream of consciousness, but I think it's important because earlier this week was the 8th anniversary of Cindy's death, and I've had a few people comment on YouTube on some of the videos I put up about basically that I'm a total dick. And there's been people that said I've even killed, like I have Cindy's blood on my hands. And I know that's not true, but I've had a few people who've made those comments. It's really interesting how they can watch one video and say, well, you're such a narcissistic dick. All you talk about is yourself. Like I've told Cindy's story so many times, but people watch one video, for example, and they use that as an example of, oh, this guy's talking about his story. Therefore, he's a narcissistic dick and he only ever talks about his story. But regardless, I think it's really important that we take feedback, even if it's from somebody whose feedback you think is weird or don't agree with or might be really mean, and think, well, I wonder if there's something I could do differently. And so I thought maybe I will. I feel like it's important to tell actually Cindy's story, maybe on this podcast, and I'm recording this too, and just try to tell it. Not from my point of view. I mean, I can only tell it from my point of view, obviously, but I mean, to try to tell her story from her point of view as much as possible based on what I know about her story. And we were together for a long time. So, and I don't really, I'm going to try really hard not to slip into telling it from my point of view, but we'll see how it goes. But I feel like it might be a really good thing because it might provide a timeline and some context to see how her life unfolded, because I think it might be interesting for other people, and I think I want to record something that the kids can listen to if they're ever interested, and maybe some of Cindy's family members and who still probably may not know some of the things that happened. And I don't know, I feel like it might be a way to honor her legacy in a way, not to disparage her or to talk about the things that happened that were not good, but quote good, but I mean, just to tell her story, because I think we all have a story, and she's not here anymore. And I think her story, there might be some lessons in it that can serve other people. So I'm here at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. I'm drinking my homemade kombucha, and let's see if we can do this in a way that makes sense. So I don't know how long this is going to be, and I don't really know what I'm going to say either, but I'm just going to try my best and see how it goes. So here we go. So Cindy was born in 1972. So she would have been 46 right now. She died when she was 38, but she was born in 1972 in Chatham, which is kind of a small town. It's about an hour from where I live now, but it's like a small kind of rural farming town. There's a little bit of industry there. Actually, there's not much industry there anymore. Oh, I have to sneeze. Excuse me. And her life was, from the very beginning, was really difficult, right? Which I think is obviously what led to a lot of the things that happened to her later on. And now, some of these things that I'm going to say are my understanding of what happened based on some of the things that I've heard and some of the things that Cindy told me. And so I don't know if they're true. I only know what I was told. So I want you to keep that in mind. I suspect they were true because of what the impact it had on Cindy later on. But regardless, She was born in 1972. And I don't know a whole lot about her early childhood other than to say her mother was schizophrenic. She had a lot of family history of mental illness on her mother's side of the family. And when I say mental illness, like I've really come to believe that it's really so much of it is about emotionally driven responses to trauma. And I look at her family, and I feel like there was a lot of abuse there, neglect, maybe drinking, a lot of those kinds of things. And I suspect that's probably why there was so much mental illness in her family. But her mother was schizophrenic, and she was very, very bad, like bad, very severe, I should say, very severely schizophrenic. And she, from what Cindy told me, there was a lot of abuse. There was sexual abuse. Her mother split up with her biological father, who I think was probably more of some kind of fling. Like, I don't think they had a long-term relationship. And I'm not saying that he abused Cindy at all. I'm not saying that at all. But then her mother remarried to another guy whose last name Cindy ended up taking on. And he was kind of a farmer, I think. I don't think I ever met him. But regardless, she had two younger brothers. There was a significant age difference between her and her younger brothers. And I think it was like 8 or 9 years. I don't really know what went on in those early years, like when she was in that family. But anyways, her mother ended up splitting up with that guy. And her brothers, actually, I'm trying to think if what ended up happening with her brothers, whether they lived with her mother or what. I don't remember. But regardless, her mother was very, very unstable. She probably still is. I think she's still alive. I'm sure she's still alive. And she was, very unstable, let's say. And so I think Cindy had to do, as a young girl, a young teenager, had to do a lot of raising of her brothers as much as possible, because her mother wasn't really around a lot of the times, or capable of doing it. And now what I heard from people and what Cindy told me is during those times when she was, younger and she was a teenager, that there was sexual abuse, and that her mother would invite men over to the house at points, and they would sexually abuse her. I have no idea if that's true. But I looked into her eyes. She had said that at one point near the end of her life. And I looked into her eyes and I had heard it from somebody else. And we were together for 16 years and I never heard it. And I looked into her eyes and I asked her about it. And the look on her face, she never said a word, actually, but the look on her face, I believed it was true. Like, just disgust with herself and shame and just abject sadness, and just the inability to even form a word about it, just shoulders slumped. And I don't know, that moment for me, it told me all I needed to know, but I don't know any specifics, and I don't 100% know what happened. But as she grew up, I mean, her mother was very unstable, and we're talking like, running through the streets of Chatham naked and praying in front of people's houses that, like a man's house that had broken up with her or whatever, like, just doing a lot of stuff like that, like kind of like the person, what you might imagine somebody who was schizophrenic doing, like kind of wandering the streets and stuff. And so Cindy was really forced to take care of her brothers, and she was forced to almost run the house. Like, her mother was institutionalized, probably many times, but I mean, Cindy was 15 years old, writing checks from her mother's account to pay the bills, while her mother was locked up basically in a psychiatric institution for her own safety. So there's just tons of trauma and, abandonment and, robbing of childhood innocence and that kind of stuff. And, her mother would do things like, one time she took all Cindy's stuff, and I think if I remember the story right, thought either Cindy's stuff was possessed by the devil or Cindy was possessed by the devil. And she took all her stuff and piled it up into a big pile in the backyard and burned it. Like, imagine that as a teenager, and Cindy, they certainly were not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. They were definitely on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. And just, then you have no stuff. Like, it's, I don't even know how you would deal with that as a teenager. So a very, and her grandmother was in town, grandmother and grandfather, and she stayed with them a lot. And, but yeah, she was on her own a lot too, right? And it's just, this abuse and this uncertainty and abandonment and doing all these things. Like, obviously, as time will tell, it took a massive toll on her. But she graduated high school. I think her brothers ended up going back to live with her stepfather, because her stepfather was her brother's biological father, and because her mother was so unstable, the boys ended up going back to live with them. Now they ended up with real issues of their own. Her older brother ended up changing. I don't know if he did the operation or whatever, but ended up living as a woman. And last time I saw her younger brother, he had just been charged with a DUI. And I mean, I don't know how much of that he was young. Yeah, I mean, it's not young. I mean, in his 20s, like he was an adult, but, really living the life of a troubled young person, I would say. But I don't really know what became of either of them. So regardless, but so Cindy went to college, and she, I think from 1990 to either 1989 to 1992, I think. And she took a rehabilitation worker program. And that was actually at the end of her college. That was the summer that I met her. So that was 1992. Now, when I met her, she was also she was a very accomplished young woman and a very accomplished person overall. And she was very driven. So actually, as she graduated college, she went away to Toronto to go to college. And, she was severely depressed when she was over there. And she had really started to gain a lot of weight. She was short, like 5'2", say. And she had quite a very muscular build, actually, like just naturally, which is interesting because Chloe has the exact same physique all the way down to the same birthmark in the same spot on her back. But in her depression, she started to gain a lot of weight. And, basically she tried to come home, and in a weird way, her mother actually did her a favor here, probably by saying, no, there's nothing for you here. You're not coming home. So she finished college, but she gained a lot of weight. And just coping with her depression by eating. And so I met her in the summer of 1992. And I remember when I first saw her. So she was a officer, like a commissioned officer in the Army cadets, basically. So in other words, she would, we were at a camp for Army cadets, and she was an officer. So she was in charge of a whole bunch of cadets, which is I think maybe 11 to 17 or 18-year-old kids. And I remember when I first saw her, so I was a private in the Army. So even though she was in the cadets, she was still my boss, and I had to call her ma'am. But I remember when I first saw her, I walked through the office on kind of my first day there. I think it was in the evening, and or maybe after work or something. And she was there because she was in her civilian clothes, not her uniform. And she had this, I was like floored. She was so beautiful. And she had this hair that was so freaking big. It was enormous, like early 90s, just massive hair, and defying the laws of physics hair. And I was just flabbergasted, like, oh my God. And so over the course of that summer, we fell in love with one another. And I always had such a feeling that she was way too good for me, because she was going off to university. And I was, I don't think I was going to, oh no, I was going to go to college. I ended up quitting right away though. But anyway, so she was going to university, and to me, it was just, she was an officer. She was freaking beautiful. She had graduated college already. She was going to university. And I was like, wow, this woman is so out of my league. So we spent the summer together. It was wonderful. It was one of those like coming of age summers, and less time at the beach, and lots of sneaking around because technically she wasn't supposed to like fraternize with an officer. I mean, it wasn't really that big a deal, but she wasn't really supposed to. So it was just so fun, like just all that little adventure, and it's one of those just epic summers that young people can experience, full of emotion. And uh, so, but coming the end of the summer, we went our separate ways, and we lived far away from one another. We lived in about 600 kilometers roughly away from one another, maybe even a little more than that, actually. Um, and and so she went to the University of Windsor, and she was going to take psychology, or she took psychology. Now, so we kept up a long distance relationship, and I mean, come on, we were both young. We were, quote, in a relationship, but we were doing our own thing, and we were seeing other people. We never really talked about it, but we for sure we were, and and but regardless, there was still kind of a connection there, So we, so she went away and got in residence, and was just kind of moving on with her life, becoming a young adult. And at some point there, so sometimes some of the timeline's a little bit fuzzy. We kind of kept up that connection over the first year of university, but I noticed she was losing a lot of weight. But in my mind, like, it was mostly, I think, towards the end of her first year of university and kind of into the beginning of her second year of university. She was losing a lot of weight. Now, I mean, I was a 19-year-old dude. I thought she looked smoking hot. Like, I thought she was hot anyways, but it never even crossed my mind that there might be some kind of issue. So, so she lost a bunch of weight. Never really thought about it. And then as she went into the second year of university, we ended up breaking up for a period of time. I was devastated. She had met somebody else, and we were so far away from one another, But anyways, I was really devastated. And so we broke up. We ended up getting back together. But regardless, during this time, it turns out she was bulimic, and very seriously bulimic. And binging and throwing up. And I didn't know this, but I mean, she was even hospitalized at one time. She was taking laxatives. Like, it was a very severe period of bulimia in her life. And, but I didn't know any of this. And so I knew she went her separate ways with her college roommate, who, interestingly enough, is so weird, but I'm friends with them now, just in a completely coincidental way. But regardless, so she was really suffering from a very severe eating disorder, which was obviously the result of some of the trauma and the experiences she had when she was a kid. So she was hospitalized. Her roommate ended up kind of moving into moving out. They ended up getting different roommates. And because her roommate wanted to, there's just too much drama. There was too much drama going on with Cindy. And so now that's not the version of the story I heard from Cindy. Cindy told me at the time, I don't remember the story, but it was like, they didn't get along and probably blamed it on her roommate. But anyways, so into the second year of university, we ended up breaking up. So she just drifted apart. She had found somebody else, and I was devastated. And so we were apart for a little while, probably a month or two, I guess. And we ended up getting back together. It felt like the right thing to do, and we moved in together. So Cindy left university. Well, she left Windsor University at the beginning of 1994, and moved up to North Bay, where I lived, and started going to Nipissing University. So at that point, we moved in together. Everything was great. Like, she was so motivated, man. She was on a different level of having her shit together by far than I was. I was such a punk, and she was going to university. She was taking the bus up there a lot of the time. She was getting up so early in the morning, and she would walk in the freezing cold. And you have to understand, for somebody that lives down in Southern Ontario, the climate is so different in Northern Ontario. Like, it is so much colder. And she would get up in the pitch black. She would walk to a pizza place and make pasta for them, pitch black, early in the morning. Had to get it all done before it was open. But she was just such a highly motivated person that way. for me, it was just like another like constant examples of why is this person even with me? Because I was such a dork. I was delivering pizza, drinking, doing drugs all the time. And anyways, so um, we ended up moving again to a town just outside of Ottawa. Now, this is everything was great. We moved into our second apartment together, and it was like, both away from I was away from my hometown, and it was just exciting, right? And one day I came home from somewhere and to our apartment, and the door was locked, and I could hear her in there, but she would not let me in the house. And then she opened the door and said, "I'll let you in a minute." Like there was a chain on the door, and she opened the door and said, "I'll let you in a minute," and then closed the door and locked it. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? So a few minutes later, I hear the toilet flush, and she comes in, she opens the door, and she looks just so full of shame and guilty. And so what's going on? And I remember she looked at me and she said, "I puke." And I had no idea what that even meant. What do you mean you puke? Like you? And so she told me that she was struggling with bulimia. And I think I was 20 at the time. I had no idea what that even, I mean, I think I knew what it meant because, Tracy Gold from Growing Pains, I remember it was kind of a national story, but the idea of, I couldn't wrap my head around why somebody would want to do something like that and why you just couldn't stop. Like but she helped me see that. And she wanted to get over it, obviously. Like, so she ended up going to an eating disorder clinic. And like Tuesday night, I think it was Tuesday nights, we would drive like 45 minutes into Ottawa, and she would go to an eating disorder clinic. And it was kind of like a support group of people that were struggling with this. And they did some, group work, and it was really like open environment where they could talk about this stuff. And she seemed to get better. Like, she was really committed to it. I would drive her there and sit in the lobby and read a car magazine. And she seemed to get better. Now she still struggled with it for a number of years afterwards, but it never really got as severe as it was, when she was hospitalized. And she was, I think, pretty open about her struggles with it. I mean, maybe it was worse than she let on, even after we originally talked about it, but I felt like it was pretty open, and I think it brought us closer together because, it never occurred to me to like leave her. That was what she was very afraid of, is when I found out I would leave her. Right. I mean, why wouldn't I? In her mind, but that never really crossed my mind. And it never crossed my mind about why this might be happening in the first place. I don't know. I felt like it was kind of random, because I just had no life experience at that time. So, but she worked through it, and again, the way she tackled everything was she just put her head down, did the work. She wasn't gifted in academically. She wasn't gifted, like she struggled academically, but she did the work. And she wasn't gifted physically. Like she was not a gifted athlete at all, because she never had any exposure to that kind of stuff, but she did the work. Like when she put her mind to something, you could not stop her. And that I always wondered where that drive came from, because I certainly did not have it. Oh my God, not even close. So what ended up happening? So then things were going great. And we ended up moving back to her hometown in the end of 1996. She had gotten a job and everything was going great. We were very poor though. I mean, like I was basically making no money, like minimum wage, and she was making like $12 an hour. And she had gone to college and graduated university, and her mother had no money. So she had some significant student loan debt. So yeah, it was very tough, but we were young, we had very few obligations. And we were living in a shitty apartment, but it was really cheap, and it was just fun. It was it was no fun being poor, but I don't know, we just didn't need much. And then, but she was and she was very beautiful, as I was saying, super, super, super charismatic. like take over a room kind of charismatic, which was another characteristic that I didn't possess. So I was really in awe of her a lot. And oftentimes wondered what the hell she was even doing with me. Um, and then so now we're moving into 1997. And so a couple things, 1997, first of all, we got married, which is wonderful. So I think I was 24, she was 25. We got married in the backyard of a one-legged preacher, which was just a funny story. He had a wooden leg, but it was beautiful. But, there was nobody there, just the two of us. And I don't really know why I didn't even invite my parents or anything. I don't remember, to be honest with you, but there was no way she was inviting her family. And her family situation was always a sore point. Oh, you know what? I wanted to tell you a story actually that I forgot. So I first met Cindy's mother actually in the summer of 1993. This to give you an example of what her mother was like. And we ended up going to Springbank Park. So anyways, the park in London, Ontario, and spent the day with Cindy and her mother and her young brothers. And it was enjoyable. We had a great day. And then we went home, like to Cindy's hometown. And then I went to pick Cindy up from her mother's place the next day. And her mother came out and she basically, she looked like she was possessed by the devil. Her eyes were wild. And she was like spittle coming out of her mouth. And she was a very slight woman, very, very small, like probably barely over 100 pounds. And she was accusing me of being the devil and of having sex with Cindy's best friend, who I'd met like maybe once or twice by this point. I'd never seen anybody like this. Like, just looked like she was not, like her body and mind had been taken over by something else. It was very frightening, actually. And Cindy was obviously really embarrassed about it. And so anyways, kind of got sidetracked. This is probably going to happen a number of times as I go through this, but I kind of got sidetracked there. But, it was my first exposure to that kind of mental illness and that kind of like, rage. Like it was frightening. I remember backing up like my walking backwards, towards my car. I was much, much bigger than her, but she scared the shit out of me. And so actually, okay, I'm going to do this thing again where I back up again. Now, in around 1995 or 1996, Cindy had connected with her half brother and half sister. So this is another part of the story. So Cindy's biological father, who her mother was with only for a short period of time, also had two other kids of his own, older brother and older sister. Now, so there was a brief period of time where Cindy really wanted a relationship with him, with her biological dad. She didn't have one at all. And she certainly didn't have one with her stepfather, because I think he was really pretty nasty to her. So she tried to, around 1995-ish, 1996, she tried to reconnect with them. And it just didn't work out. Like, it felt to her at the time like, he didn't give a shit about her. She had all these hopes, like, you can imagine, right? A young woman desperately wanting a father figure. I could tell with her, even at the time, that when she found a man in her life, like an older man who would treat her nicely and be like a mentor, she put them on a pedestal that was so high. Because she wanted a dad so badly, right? Anyway, so she spent, I don't remember the timeline, probably like 6 months or something. She made some efforts to connect with her biological father and half brother and half sister. And it just was too painful for her. Like, she felt like she was never going to have that kind of relationship, the magical type of relationship that she hoped for. And so she ended up just basically cutting off those relationships. And, which is an interesting thing that it's interesting how that ended up turning out later. So, okay, now we're back to being married. And so we just gotten married and things were really positive. Cindy actually shortly, right around that time, got a job at a truck plant in Chatham. And so it's funny, in Chatham, this was like, because it's kind of an economically depressed, small, rural, Southern Ontario town. It's almost like what I would imagine kind of a Rust Belt town in the United States being. Anyways, at this time there was still a big automotive, like they made like tractor trailer, like 18-wheeler trucks, and it was the place to work, man. It was called Navistar. You had a job at Navistar, like fuck, you were laughing. I mean, which is funny to think about because it was like, I think it was like $20 an hour, but man, at the time it was like we won the freaking lottery, right? Because we were so poor. God, to make like $20 an hour, it was freaking crazy. And so at the same time, she was applying to get on the OPP. Now, which was a huge motivation for me because I was kind of a bum at that time, just working shitty minimum wage jobs. And I thought to myself, holy crap, I better go back to school. So this was like the fall of 1997. I got to go back to school because she's going to get a good job. And I am going to be a fucking loser who, a cop's husband who's basically a bum. So I went back to school and took computer programming. But the main reason I did it at the time was because I could see how much potential she had. And I really felt like she was going to get on the job, on the OPP, because college, university, smart, beautiful, charismatic. Like I knew she would ace the interview, all the interviews and stuff. And so she applied, and in April of 1998, she got on the Ontario Provincial Police. And it was like, and so I had just finished a year of school, and it was like, I don't know, man, like, holy crap, our lives just got real. That's what it felt like, right? So she went away to police college. Excuse me. Now, I'm going to tell some of these stories because I'm telling Cindy's version, like Cindy's version of the story. I'll try to talk about events as I know they happened and not as I found out about them. So, so she went to police college and she did really well there. But while she was at police college, she had an affair with some guy, which I found out about like probably close to 6 or 7 years later. But anyways, she had an affair with this guy, another cop, another guy that was going to be a cop. And I don't know. I don't really know how long it went on, but yeah, it is what it is, right? And I think she was always looking for connection with people and to be validated. And because her self-esteem was actually really quite low. And I just didn't know this somehow. Like I just didn't have any self-awareness. And, so she was always searching to be validated. And I think when people paid her attention, especially guys paid her attention, she craved that. She really craved that. So that's what happened. And so she graduated police college. We ended up moving up north. It's funny, even further up north than we lived when we first went to North Bay. Now by this time, from what I know, and we were together all the time. I think she had really conquered her eating disorder. Like I never really saw it be an issue again. So, everything seemed to be amazing. Like, we were living up north. We were living in a small apartment. You don't make much money when you're on the OPP, but she seemed to be doing really well at work. Her coach officer really seemed to like her, and she was making friends in the OPP. And she was working out all the time, and she was actually competing in She competed in a powerlifting competition and won it. And like it was amazing, right? Everything was going incredible. So, and there didn't seem to be any mental health issues and stuff. And so anyways, I ended up finishing college. So now we're about the year 2000. And I know now there's a lot of stuff that was going on that I didn't know about, like fooling around and stuff like that. But, and I don't really know, actually, I don't know any of the details. And let's be real, I wasn't perfect either. We were young, it was a kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a crazy life. And so, where are we here? So now we're in 2000. So now I get a job. So kind of my first professional job outside of college. And now, man, we are fucking laughing. Like I'm working for this cool consulting company, making good money. She's working for the OPP, making good money. This is like the year 2000, right before the tech, the .com boom and bust. It was amazing. And so then what ends up happening, so she's been on the OPP for about, roughly, so we move into like 2001-ish, and she's been on the OPP for like 2.5 years, and she gets on the drug unit, the undercover drug unit. This is unheard of. Okay, like nobody gets on the undercover drug unit after 2.5 years in the OPP. Like it just doesn't happen. But she was beautiful and she was charismatic. I mean, I can't even describe how charismatic she was. And so, when it was like, if she got an opportunity to have an interview with someone, she wasn't not going to get the job. It was basic. There's no way that was going to happen. And so she got on, and it was unbelievable. Like, but here's the thing. At the same time, we were doing a lot of, not a lot at that time, but we were doing drugs too. Like, I mean, so she was a cop, and it's not uncommon. Let's be real. But, we were doing coke, and on the weekends, like party drugs, we're doing ecstasy, like not a lot, like not tons, but, like recreational party drug users. Right. And I always had this stupid double standard because I thought it was totally fine for me to do it, but she was a cop, so it wasn't fine for her. So that was just whatever. So she's on the undercover drug unit. It's a kind of a crazy life. You're all over the place. You got a pager. Your work and life is totally blended because these people you're dealing with and trying to catch or, whatever, you got to be available all the time. And I noticed though her behavior was it seemed erratic to me. Like I can remember going to a rave and her being on ecstasy and coming home, and she was there too. And we had met people there, obviously, because rave, everybody loves each other. And she's like making all these notes at the end of the night, still on ecstasy, like police notes. And I'm like, this is fucked up, man. This is fucked up. Like, and so her behavior. So I'm going to tell this part of the story again, based on what I know to be true now, but I didn't really understand it at the time. She was doing a lot of erratic shit when she was on the drug unit, man. And, and she really was not getting along with her boss. And it was like, because she wasn't reliable. She was scattered. She was taking risks that, it's a, you have this idea of what the drug unit is you see it on TV, and, it's like, but in my experience, secondhand experience from her, what she told me, it was very bureaucratic, and it's obviously very low risk. You want to mitigate, not that it's low risk, but you want to mitigate the risks as much as possible. And it attracts a certain kind of person, like being on this unit. So anyways, it was, she was behaving pretty erratically, and her boss was really starting to not like her. Now, according to Cindy at the time, the reason her boss didn't like her was because her boss was a lesbian, and somehow she had it out for Cindy, and so very quickly, her undercover drug unit career, started to fall apart. I think she was only on the drug unit for I'm going to say a year, and she ended up getting kicked off the drug unit. Now, during that time, though, what was happening was she was doing things that, let's say, what's the best way to put this? So I'll give you an example. So she got liposuction during that time. She got a boob job during that time, which, well, I mean, I don't know. It is what it was. I could, she was kind of a little bit heavier, and she was really self-conscious about it, and she was not happy about her boobs. So that was all fine. And then she got hair extensions, and I remember thinking at the time, they were so long, and I remember thinking, I feel like your coworkers aren't going to take you seriously. Like, I don't know. But she was so angry when I questioned it because, I'm making this money, and, don't you question what I want to make? But I remember feeling really surprised at the anger, because I was more concerned about, I knew she was struggling on the drug unit, and I was more concerned about, not that I don't care really about that she was spending $1,000 on hair extensions. it was more like, are you sure this is a good idea? Because aren't you going to look like a bit of a flake? Like all of a sudden you show up with like, princess hair or something. I don't know. So, but I remember being surprised at her level of anger that I even questioned it. And that was very uncharacteristic for her. But regardless, during the time when her drug career was falling apart, she also started to do things like she was going into the gym and working out for like 3 hours straight, like on the treadmill, just nonstop. And I remember thinking it was really weird, but I worked out a lot too, like certainly not that much, but I remember thinking, God, this is so excessive. But at the same time, I could see it was an incredibly stressful situation. And so it seemed to me like a reasonable way to manage stress, I guess. So that's what she was doing. So make a long story short, she gets kicked off the drug unit and then she goes back on the road. And it was devastating for her, humiliating. But you know what? She did what she always does, and she went back on the road. And which going back on the road just means like driving a cruiser around, like being a kind of a frontline cop. So it was definitely a demotion. But she did like she always does, just always did, just tackled it head on. So we're like in 2002 now, and we ended up buying a house. We had our first house built in 2002, and even through that whole drug unit thing, I mean, it was a great time. Nice new house. I had gotten a new job at this point. We had moved. We were making great money. Like, I mean, this would have been 2002 when we were making probably, between the two of us, probably 170, 180,000 bucks a year. Probably about 170,000 bucks a year. So, still very little debt, like very low expenses. It was freaking amazing, and our life seemed to be going really well. So then we decided to, now Cindy she never, like hardly ever menstruated. And she really had problems with her, she didn't really go to the bathroom very much, like number two, let's say. And so we felt like, that's not had anything to do with anything, but she had shit going on with her body that was, I don't want to say unusual. I don't know how unusual it is, but it was just what it was, I guess. But, it was probably an issue of some sort. Like she would go a long, long time without going to the bathroom, and she would only menstruate sometimes, I don't even think once a year. She was on the pill a lot, actually. So she could menstruate. I don't know if that was a good idea or not, but regardless, we knew when we finally decided to have kids in 2002, it was going to be a challenge, obviously. And we went probably over a year, over a year, trying to have kids and being unsuccessful. Mostly, I got as was typical. I mean, I got a sperm count done. Things were okay on my end. And so for us, when you're trying to get pregnant and you can't, it's like all of a sudden, every one of your friends is having babies. Every commercial you see is something to do with diapers or baby food. And everyone around you in the neighborhood is pushing babies in strollers. Like that's what it felt like. It's interesting how the human mind works that way. And, but she really felt like a failure as a woman, and I can understand that. I mean, that's, sort of the fundamentally kind of makes you a woman is your ability to have a baby. So, I don't know if that was a patriarchal thing to say or not, but you know what I mean? And so it was really challenging for her. So we ended up going to fertility doctor. And so she took some pills to make her ovulate, and we got pregnant the first month. It was amazing. And she took the pregnancy really seriously. Like she was not a big drinker, but obviously didn't drink anything. And the one thing that was funny though, was that she felt really, really terrible. Like when she was sick for most of her pregnancy, and she ate so much chocolate. God, I would go out and get her, cause she went off work pretty early actually. I bought her so much chocolate. It was freaking crazy. She gained a ton of weight when she was pregnant. And she got up to 190, I don't know if she hit 200 pounds, but she was damn close. She was within a couple pounds of that, right? At 5'2". anyway, so we had a beautiful, healthy baby, easy delivery. It was wonderful. And I remember her thinking, I remember, I remember thinking, I can remember her standing on the scale after the baby, after Chloe was born. And her, I think what she thought in her mind was that she was going to have this baby and it's like, whew, all the weight's going to be gone. And she stepped on the scale and she was still like 190 pounds. And she was like, oh my God, what have I done? But so then what she did was exactly what she always did. She tackled it like a friggin' boss. And she just, went to the gym all the time and, got back down to her normal weight quickly. However, it was in this period of time when when things started to happen. The first thing that happened was, I think it was in May of 2004. And I woke up in the morning. We'd been over at a friend's house the night before, a couple nights before, good friends. And there's an email. And basically the email was, well, I don't remember the words of the email, but Cindy had tried to kiss our friends, like the wife. And the email was basically saying, I'm so disappointed that you tried to do that. Even it's still cheating. And I don't know if we can be friends anymore. Basically something to that effect. I read this email and my fucking blood ran cold, man. And I went in and she was in the shower and I confronted her and she just started to bawl. We had a young baby and my entire world had just been shaken here at this point. And I remember saying to her, if you are capable of this, you are capable of anything. And she was terrified that I was going to leave her. And, we were still pretty young, man. Like, 31, I was 31, she was 32. And I remember leaving her never really crossed my mind, but it was like my whole, everything I thought I knew kind of thing was shaken. And she was so remorseful though, like just, and so I forgave her, right? So we'd been together for 12 years at this point. We had a house, we had a new baby. She seems so remorseful. And I totally believe that her remorse was genuine. So I forgave her. And then we ended up so then in that summer, we went to Las Vegas. We hadn't really taken a vacation together, like something like that, like ever really. So we went to Las Vegas. And I remember at the time, she was so risk taking, let's say. She was like, she wanted to buy coke off people we didn't know on the street. She wanted to, go to a rave and buy ecstasy. And she was wanting to have threesomes with people, which you would think to me would have been like a dream come true, to be honest with you, but I was just not into it at all. And I was like, but I remember saying to her, like, are you fucking crazy? Like, you want to go to a rave in Las Vegas. You're a fucking cop. We have a baby at home. You want to go to a rave and buy ecstasy from people you don't know. We could get busted. Like, what would even happen then? We end up in fucking jail in the United States. There's no way of doing that. And I'm saying this as a person who is like not really responsible at the time. But I remember thinking, and I'm still, so in some ways I'm still reeling. I am still reeling from this, her trying to make out with our friend's wife just a few months before. And I remember just having this deep sense of what the fuck is going on right now. But anyways, we got pregnant again. So this time right away, like it wasn't even intentional actually. We were having unprotected sex obviously, but I don't know, it just wasn't planned, say. So I think we got actually pregnant. I think she got pregnant in Vegas, which is kind of a funny story. But so then she gets pregnant and everything's like back to normal when she's pregnant. She's wonderful. She's such a responsible mother. She took much better care of her physical health this time. And it was like, everything was like, okay, thank God, everything's back to the way it was. And then Melody was born on March 20th, 2005. And it was from that point forward that things were just never the same again. So I remember about a month after Cindy, after Melody was born, like maybe it was in April, and we went out with friends, and we went out to this crazy restaurant where it was like they had like a 6 month waiting list, and it was like run by these two gay guys, and it was the most flamboyant, crazy thing ever. Like they had everybody would go there and they would dress up, and like I ate half the dinner with my shirt off, and it was just craziness. It was just so fun and unlike anything, it just was a legendary restaurant. And but Cindy was dancing really, really sexy. Like, and I was super uncomfortable with it. And part of the reason I was uncomfortable with it, I mean, part of it was probably it was a prude a little bit, but part of it was like I still had this feeling like I was, even though it was like a year before, I was still thinking about her trying to make out with this woman, with our friend's wife. I mean, with the wife in our relationship with our friends, because we were definitely friends with both of them. And I remember she got so fucking mad at me, like rage mad. We were driving home in the car, and she was actually like flicking me in the face with her fingers. And she's saying, "You're trying to control me." And this double standard. I had just gotten back from Austria on a work trip. So this is another thing. I had just got this fancy new corporate job, and I was traveling all over the world. She's like, "You think you can travel to Austria and I come home and I try to dance and you're trying to control me?" And she actually talked about divorce. Like at this time, she was so mad. And I was like, I'd never seen her like this. And like physically, like again, like flicking me really hard in the face. And it was awful. And I was like, you're talking about divorce? Like, what are you talking about? And so, and that kind of passed, there was all these things that happened where at this time I wasn't seeing, there was a pattern that was kind of there, but I didn't connect like bulimia. I didn't connect what I knew about her childhood. Like I did not have the knowledge or anything to start piecing these pieces of the puzzle together. So regardless, we ended up with my job, we ended up moving closer to the Toronto area. And so we had to sell our house, and we moved. Now we found a place to rent, and we put like a $3,000 deposit down on this place to rent, and for some last month's rent. And right before we were going to move, she just decided we're not moving there. And she was so adamant about it. Like, but not for any reason. It was just, I couldn't, and she was furious about it. Like, "I'm not moving there. There's no way." So we ended up losing $3,000 because she just refused to move. And this left us in a huge problem because we had to find a house to live in really quick, which left us in a really shitty position because we had no negotiating power. So we ended up buying a house with a pool and overpaying for it big time. Yeah, well, I don't know about big time, but we ended up definitely overpaying for it. And it was like, what is going on here? Like, I don't understand. I just didn't understand what was going on with her and her rage and this. The house decision seemed so irrational to me because she couldn't provide any kind of reason, and she was so adamant about it. It was like, I don't know, man. So we moved into this house, and everything started to go downhill after that. Now I'm going to try to tell this from her point of view. It's going to be a challenge, so forgive me if I try not to make this about me as much as possible. But at that point, she was so angry about so many things. And as we moved into this house, she started buying, so she's still on maternity leave at this time from Melody, our second daughter. So Melody was only, probably 5-6 months old at this point. And I noticed Cindy started to lose a lot of weight. She started to get really, really unpredictable, but she always had these reasons for being unpredictable. So she's losing a lot of weight, and it's like, "I want to be sexy for you." And which again, I'm not going to lie about it. I did think she looked very hot. So it's not that I was encouraging it. I was tacitly encouraging it, by the way I reacted, I guess. But she started to get really, really mad a lot. And about stuff that was like, there was a kernel of truth to it, but we're talking rage mad, white rage mad. And I'd never really experienced this with her. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Like screaming at me in the grocery store kind of thing. and like in front of everybody. Um, and she started buying so much stuff for the house. Oh my God. Like she was spending so much money, and she was started to disappear more. Like she'd go out to do like go to the grocery store and she'd come back 6 hours later or that kind of stuff. And then she stopped. It's like she didn't stop sleeping, but for all intents and purposes, she stopped sleeping. Like she'd be up all night. And then she started, and all this stuff is going on. So it's not like it was like one phase to the other. It was like it was all going on at the same time. So the rage, the disappearing, the spending, the she seemed to be drinking a lot more. Like she would when she got but you know what? I was doing the same thing. She would get drunk to the point of being completely shit faced. But that's how I was too, right? So and she started organizing organizing the house so much that it was just constant chaos. There was shit everywhere. She was buying so much stuff. We were we were making great money, man. Like my job, I was making about over $100,000 a year as a cop with overtime and stuff. Like that's about what she was making too. And we were going into debt like really fast. We had never really been in debt. And I didn't know what was happening. And so she's losing like big time amounts of weight. So this is going through the fall of 2005. And she would start staying up to the point where she would collapse. Like she would literally collapse. I just can't, like, I couldn't fit, her body wouldn't go on anymore. And it was just all that stuff. And I had no idea what was happening. I'm trying to go to work and I'm trying to, she started bringing this 17-year-old kid over to help, even though she's on maternity leave, bringing this 17-year-old kid over to babysit and she just put this kid on a pedestal. Like it was the weirdest thing. She was a 17-year-old kid. She was kind of a deadbeat actually, but to Cindy, it was like she was the second coming of Christ. And she started to really put down my parenting skills all the time and basically say how this 17-year-old is a better parent than I am. And like started being very, very vicious. And it was like everything was out of control at this point. And I didn't know what was happening. And so as we're going into around Christmas time of 2005, she actually collapsed. She ended up having to go to the hospital. I don't know if it was on Christmas Day I think it might have actually been on Christmas Day. It was either Christmas Day or the day before or the day after. And the doctor said, she's lucky she hasn't had a stroke because it turns out she was hiding alcohol all around the house, like vodka, so you couldn't smell it. And she was taking a ton of Xanax. I still don't, I have no idea where she was getting it all, but it was all hidden, like kind of in the rafters in the basement kind of stuff. And she had gotten down to at this point, so she was normally about 140 pounds. She was down to like 105 pounds. And as for somebody that had a muscular build, like it was shocking, at 5'2", that's a ton of weight for somebody that's that size. And so by this point, I know there's something seriously, seriously wrong, obviously. So into the early year of 2016 or 2006, sorry. She was just totally out of control, disappeared. She's starting to disappear now for, day at a time, 2 days at a time, always with some ridiculous explanation when she came back. And just, really, if we went anywhere, she'd flirt with, like, just openly with every guy, she would talk to, that kind of thing. And anyways, she finally got to the point where one morning at one day at like 3:00 in the morning, there was a knock on the door. I opened the door and there's a cop and there's a social worker at our door. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing here? And so it turns out, I guess Cindy had tried to wean herself off Xanax at this point and was having all kinds of horrible withdrawal symptoms. And I had no idea any of this was happening. So trying to wean herself off Xanax and that kind of stuff. And she called like telehealth, which is this, like telephone health thing where you can get some advice from a nurse or whatever instead of going to the emergency room. And I don't know what she said, but whatever she said was bad enough that they came over to the house. What ended up happening as a result of that was that she wasn't allowed, because of that and some other things. And it's a little fuzzy, but she wasn't allowed to be around the kids unsupervised, which was devastating to her. Obviously, she's her mother. But I mean, turns out this was such a helpful thing. Oh my God. So we finally decide she's got to go to the doctor. Like, this is absolutely out of control. And she finally, I had been telling her this for a long time, but she finally accepted that, yes, I need to go to the doctor. She goes to the doctor. So I took her we went to the doctor together. We're sitting in the waiting room and she is like literally vibrating. She's a skeletal. She just looked crazed, like a crazed animal. And she's vibrating and she's like, I can't go in there because my mother told me they sexually abused her when she was locked up in a fucking psych ward. And her biggest fear was becoming her mother. Always her biggest fear. And so we go in and the doctors goes, oh my God, you need to go to see a psychiatrist, basically. So we go see a psychiatrist and he sees her for half an hour. It was literally a half an hour. And diagnoses her as bipolar. So for her, just devastating. For me, it was like, thank God it's got a name. Maybe we can do something about it now, But so he prescribed some medication. I don't remember. This is just the first of tons of medication. So she was completely out of control at this point. I don't think she took the medication, but what ended up happening was in February of 2006, she was so out of control. Her friend, our next door neighbor, was going to Cuba or going on a tropical vacation or something. And so he's like, oh, I'll watch the house and I'll clean the house. And there was one night she went over there. She drank all the booze in the house. She almost burned the house down. She lit all these candles all over the house. And I was sleeping. I didn't even know she was doing this. And I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and she's not there in the house. And I go outside and I see our neighbor's door wide open. And I walk in the house and it's like a fucking haunted house. Like, there's these candles all over the place and there's music playing and shit all over the place. And I actually walk into her bedroom and she's putting a doll, like a Cabbage Patch Kid, to bed, like it's an actual baby. And I was like, she was so shit-faced and she was so off her rocker. And I was like, oh my God. And so she went back and she went to bed. And now I was driving the kid. She fell asleep. I was driving the kids somewhere in the morning who were very young at this time. Like, still, Melody wasn't even a year old and Chloe had just turned 2. And sorry about this lighting here for people that are watching the video. It's getting light outside behind me. But and I called her friend, and her friend basically told me that Cindy had sex with 2 guys at once, somewhat recently. Anyways, I pulled the car over and threw up, and I went back to the house. I kicked the fucking bedroom door open, and I screamed in her face that she was a fucking whore. And it was unbelievable what happened next. She started packing up all her shit into the car. She's still completely shit-faced. She's going to leave for a while. And so she made the kids, she was out of control. She made the kids about 50, 60 pancakes. She wrapped them up in tinfoil. She put them in the closet, and she ended up calling the police on me to try to, because she thought I was going to try to prevent her from leaving the house, which I definitely was going to. So the police come over and anyways, they end up taking her. She couldn't drive, obviously, but they took her somewhere in town. And by this point, I had cut off her bank accounts. Our line of credit was completely racked up. Like, it was crazy. So I cut her off because I knew I knew what she would do. She would just talk to her work. She was still on maternity leave, but she would talk to her work and get her paycheck diverted into her own bank account. But I just couldn't have her have access to credit anymore. So she ended up feeling like she couldn't be in our house anymore, and she moved away. And part of why she moved away, like 3 hours away, back to her hometown, part of the reason she moved away was because she had this overpowering need to reconnect with her stepfather, who never gave two shits about her, never played any part in her life, but it was like a mission. She had to reconnect. So she literally packed up her shit, left me with the babies, and moved 3 hours away. She fought for 5 months, 4 or 5 months. And during this time, she was going to transfer to the OPP, like down there. And in her mind, she was going to bring the kids down there. This was so terrifying for me, but still, she couldn't be around the kids unsupervised. So thank God she couldn't take the kids from me, because I could call the cops on her or call CAS, or for people in the States, it's like, Child Protective Services or whatever. So I didn't have to worry about that, but she moved away, and she would come back once every, few weeks, scream at me, tell me what a fucking loser I was, tell me how awful a parent I was, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, she was going to build up a whole new life. And then it's totally manic, totally emotionally dysregulated. She eventually ended up coming home in like July of that year. And actually, when she finally came home, she seemed normal, like kind of normal, like back to her old version of herself. But what ended up happening was, I see now, it was like a descent into just crushing depression is what it was. So she's going from this totally dysregulated state, call it manic, whatever you want to call it. And it was like she was sliding downward. And as she was sliding downward, there was a point there where she was kind of in the normal range. So she was super fit and she was running, but it all came crashing down in say the August, September of 2016. She couldn't get out of bed. She went on disability. I'd never seen crushing depression like this. It was awful. She was just so full of shame and guilt and remorse about the things she had done, and what a fucking horrible mother she was, and what a failure she was. And she was crying for days on end. She was in physical agony. The depression was so bad. It was like the nerves on her body were exposed. I could not believe that this kind of human suffering was even possible. And then she finally told me in, say, late September, early October, that she was thinking about taking her own life. And I was like, oh my God. So she wanted help though, so we took her to the mental health clinic. They got her in to see a psychiatrist right away. He referred her to basically, it's called a Form 1, which is like when somebody is mentally ill and they get locked up basically against their will, involuntarily. Now, he ended up Form 1ing her, but the reason she wanted to go to this facility, the reason he Form 1'd her is because it's the only way you can get in without being on a waiting list. So she went to this facility in Guelph called Homewood. And it was a locked psychiatric ward. And to her, this is the nightmare scenario, right? Because she had become her mother. And it was an unbelievable experience. I remember taking the shoelaces. I remember, they were very kind, but I remember leaving and then locked this metal door, just locking between us. And it was like we were literally 3 feet from one another, but it was like we were an entire universe apart from one another. And so during that time, it was bad. Like she was there for 8 weeks, I think. She got electroshock therapy a whole bunch of times. She was on some very powerful medications. It was pretty brutal. During that time with the electroshock therapy, she lost her short-term memory. So I'd go visit her a couple times a week. It was about an hour from our house, maybe. And I'd go visit her a few times a week, and she would call me on the way home hysterical because I never came to visit her. So at this point, I also felt like I was going insane. And I had, I was trying to raise these kids, trying to work, not knowing what was going to happen with my wife. And so, make a long story short, she was there for about 8 weeks, and she finally came home. During this time, my grandmother died, actually. I wasn't really close to my grandmother, but Cindy had no recollection of that even happening. That's what electroshock therapy did to her. So she came home. Now we're coming in kind of around Christmas, I would say, of 2006. And The next number of years were just a continuing cycle of depression and mania. And, you know, us, when she was depressed, it was easier for me because she wouldn't leave the house. She wouldn't barely leave bed when she was on kind of the manic side of things. And this is her having a diagnosis of bipolar. I don't think she was bipolar at all anymore, but regardless, this is the snapshot from that time. And she just would, it was just, I felt like there was the Cindy that I knew and fell in love with no longer existed. That's what it felt like to me. And so things just in our relationship were shit. I mean, they just deteriorated. I was drinking heavily. I was all the things, this isn't about me though. So see, I caught myself there. So, so for her, she's got all of this stuff going on, and she sees her husband, drinking, and I was trying to be supportive, but I had my own shit to deal with, like as a result of all this stuff. I feel like I should move where I'm sitting right now so I can, the lighting is a little better. You know what? It doesn't really matter, I guess. And so, where am I going with this? Yeah, you know what? I am going to move. So bear with me for people. Bear with me. There are people listening on the podcast, okay? So, but I'll keep talking as I'm moving. So this is, we'll keep it real here. And I don't want to knock my lamp over, so just, all my cords are tangled up. Oh, there. So, okay, we're getting there. So now it's kind of dark because I got to turn the lights on. This is a really interesting experience to tell this story from this perspective, actually. Bear with me. I'm just going to go get my light, and then we'll be good. I'm coming. Okay, got my chair. Let me turn some lights on. Set up here. I got the whiteboard behind me so you can see our family stuff. Got a creaky chair here, so I'm just going to get a blanket. Okay, so I'm back. So by this time, our relationship is in shambles. So we're kind of in 2007, 2008 right now. And I don't really remember a lot of details actually between 2007 and 2008, to be honest with you, other than it was a very chaotic, crazy time. I was struggling. She was struggling. She was obviously struggling worse than I was. I felt just so much pressure to try to keep my shit together. But I guess we'll go to 2008. And that was when so we took a trip to Denver in 2008. I was doing a training thing for work. And it was absolutely awful. Oh my God. So we were so broke at this point because the amount of money she had spent over the years. We had gotten consolidation loan. We thought we had gotten ourselves back on good footing. And she would this is a very common characteristic, but she spent so much money, and she felt so entitled to it, and just full of rage whenever I would bring it up. And our house was full of shit, just stuff she was buying, and it was unbelievable how much money she was spending. And we went to Denver, and it was awful. She screamed at me the whole time. She was doing things like she'd go to 3 hours of yoga a day while I was at the training session I was at. But, she'd buy $1,000 worth of clothes. And just the idea, she could be physically abusive, like shoving me around and slapping me. And I can remember one time coming home from a restaurant, in the evening, just her screaming at me on this bridge we were walking by. The people's all around, you know, and I was like, I cannot do this anymore. Like this is crazy. But I felt an incredible amount of guilt, right? So but for her, she felt like in her mind, what she was doing was making sense to her, right? And I didn't appreciate that at the time. Like I've learned that since, but I didn't appreciate that time. So for her, she felt like a completely justified in her behavior, and that her husband didn't give a shit about her and wasn't listening to her and all that kind of stuff. And so we came back from Denver, and things just throughout the course of 2008, things deteriorated. And I took a trip to New York in 2008 for work, and at that time our relationship was almost over. So we had tried counseling, didn't work. Um, you know, we had planned going to a mediator because we were going to separate. We had talked about separating, and that didn't work. She just didn't happen. And I remember being in New York, talking on the phone, and she wanted to hire a nanny for some reason. I was so against it. We didn't have any money. Like, what are you talking about? Like, God. And she wanted to hire this nanny who was basically a very troubled woman herself, who was in this relationship, this abusive relationship, and this guy was stalking her. And I'm like, you're fucking kidding me? You're trying to tell me that you want to get a nanny. First of all, we don't need a nanny. We can't afford a nanny. We don't need a nanny. Who the fuck has a live-in nanny? You know what I mean? And a live-in daycare. And you want to bring in someone whose husband is stalking them. Like this was the kind of thinking. And at that time, I remember being in the airport and her saying, well, since we're going to separate, like it just totally calm. Since we're going to separate and you've already agreed that the kids are going to be with me all of the time. And I was like, I can't even describe what this was like. So, but anyways, I'm making this about me again. But so in her mind, yeah, I had agreed that we're going to separate. She's going to get full custody of the kids, which obviously never was any agreement. But so in the fall of 2008, I ended up moving out. It was more of she threw me out. I didn't want to leave, but it was just I just couldn't stay. I just could not stay there. And then for the next 15 months ish, we were apart, and it was unbelievable. So at this point, she had retained a lawyer, and she was absolutely adamant that the reason that we were broke had nothing to do with her spending, but it had to do with the fact that I had squirreled all the way in I'd squirreled away money in all these offshore bank accounts. Now, I will say when she was depressed, because that happened, those depressive cycles happened a number of times. She was actually, her sense of self was very distorted in the idea, like how much of a loser and failure and all those things she felt like, but she was also very rational about acknowledging the things that she had done when she was manic, so for me, it was like, sometimes you could see the quote, the truth, and sometimes you couldn't, but regardless. So after we separated, and she had retained a lawyer, and she retained this vicious lawyer. And she would come over and she would tell me she was going to take the kids, and that she knew I'd fucked her over financially, and she was going to take everything. And not that there was much to take at this point, but it was terrifying for me. So I retained a lawyer as well. And, we didn't have the money, and those bills were racking up. I had moved out of the house. I was still paying the mortgage on both places because I still cared about her. Right. And I just wanted to try to emerge from this with my sanity and my credit in check. So, but during the course of that 15 months, she changed the schedule with the kids 65 times, and she just couldn't handle it. Like she would, and those 65 times were almost always ended up with me having the kids more than was originally scheduled. But we would have a schedule. She would even have a schedule sent over from her lawyer and say, okay, for the month of February, this is what it's going to look like. And then she would just randomly change it. She would drop them off early. She would pick them up days late, and then accuse me of changing the schedule. I'd get more hate mail from her lawyer and blah, blah, blah. So in her mind, she was spinning out of control at this point. Like, I mean, she'd been out of control for a long time, but she was deteriorating. But I didn't really understand how much, because we didn't live together anymore. And she would accuse me of stealing her mail and like all kinds, like spying on her in the house and all kinds of stuff. And um, so, you know, it was, it was going to end up, we were going to go to court, but we were spending so much money on lawyers. And it was just, this was the cycle, right? It was just total unpredictability, me having the kids most of the time, her actually believing that she had the kids most of the time. Like she would actually say that to me, like, you never take the kids. They're always with me. How can you expect me to be able to manage a full-time job? And I'm like, are you fucking, what are you talking? Like the kids are with me like 80% of the time. What are you talking about? So she, at this point, during our separation, she had gotten a nanny. So one thing that she did was, we had the kids in daycare. I showed up one time. So this is after we separated. I showed up one time and I went to drop the kids off at daycare, and they said, well, Cindy pulled the kids out of daycare. And I was like, what? Like I freaked out on her, because what am I supposed to do? Right? What am I going to do? I had to call my mother to come and live with us for 3 months. So she had hired a Filipino nanny, wonderful woman. And I said, you have to let this nanny come over to my house. Like, what are you doing? What am I supposed to do with the kids? You just took them out of daycare, and they couldn't get back in for like 6 months. And so the nanny would come over to my house, and she would tell me things about Cindy and stuff. And anyways, Cindy ended up not paying the nanny. And then so she accused her of stealing a ring. There's no way this woman stole anything from her. She was all she wanted was to bring her family over from the Philippines. Like, there's just no way in hell. Okay, so we're picking this up about 3 weeks later now. And sorry, when I was talking about the nanny last time, everybody got up, and so I stopped recording. It's amazing how fast time can fly. And it's also amazing how I'm randomly wearing the exact same shirt I was wearing last time. So make of that what you will. So what I wanted to talk about too is I wanted to talk about Cindy's sort of what she would have experienced with me as a husband, the version of myself that I was at that time. So, because when she was going through all this, like, I think there's something that's very important to acknowledge is that when she was going through all this, people who suffer extreme emotional dysregulation, the things that they're doing make sense to them. And I think that's really an important thing to acknowledge. And I think the other thing to acknowledge is that that everybody's doing the best they can. Like, I think those are very important assumptions to go through the world. So if you look at Cindy, I mean, you have to understand things from her point of view. I certainly was very rarely able to do this during this time. I would say that I was able to understand her point of view when she was depressed, because everything she said kind of made sense to me. Like, she was full of shame and regret and remorse and guilt and all of these things. And I mean, because of all the things she'd done, I could certainly understand why she would feel that way. But when she was emotionally dysregulated, like on the manic side of the spectrum, she had a husband who would consistently invalidate her emotional experience. And the reason is, and I don't want to justify my behavior, I just want to explain, I want to explain it, because what I was thinking at the time, because I wanted to make her see my point of view, because my belief about it was that I was like, if she was saying things that made no sense to me, I would simply point out all of the destruction and chaos that her behavior had created. And therefore, that's why my point of view is the better point of view. Like, I'm not bipolar. So fuck, like, obviously my point of view makes more sense than yours. So, and my intention for doing that was to just help her see a, quote, better point of view. But what she actually had was a lot of times a husband who would invalidate her emotional experience. So she would be exceptionally upset about something. And instead of trying to connect with her and acknowledge that her emotional experience was legitimate, that there are no wrong, quote, wrong emotions, and that her emotions were understandable during the circumstance. Like, so for example, if she felt like like I said before, there was times where she thought I was stealing her mail, or like she actually believed it. And what I would have done now, because I have such a much broader set of skills as it relates to this, I would have, obviously, if you felt like somebody is stealing your mail, it'd be extremely upsetting. And I would be upset too if I thought somebody was stealing my mail, because she truly believed it. But instead, I just told her she was fucking crazy and paranoid. And my point being that she consistently got a message from me that her emotional experience was illegitimate, and it's a very invalidating and hurtful thing. And um, I was really damaging the ability. I was making her feel worse about herself. I was making her feel more alone, and I was damaging our ability to really have any human connection and having dialogue. Okay, so that's what she was. One of the things that she was dealing with, right? So on top of everything else, she had a husband that was incapable of getting her, let's say, which made it worse. She also had a husband who was drinking extremely heavily and who really had stopped giving much of a shit about her. So think about how isolating that must have been, So I cared about her. Obviously, we were together for a long time, but I more cared about making my own pain go away, I think, without even being able to acknowledge or understand that I was in pain or that I was angry or that I was scared or any of those things. So she had a husband who was coping with his emotions through drinking and doing all this stuff that people who drink way too much do, like being mean and not being present, even pissing in the bed, puking in the bed, saying inappropriate shit to the neighbors and like all this stuff. It was a very, very crazy time. So on top of all that, that's why I always try to make it super, super clear that I'm no hero, not even a little bit. I did a lot of, she had a husband who I would say tried really fucking hard during that time, but with a very limited set of skills, very limited self-awareness, and very little context or information about how to even go about handling something like this, and with very little understanding about how important it is to reach out or even where to reach or to be open about his feelings. So I was suffering, her husband was suffering, and that just contributed to the dynamic of isolation and loneliness, and it made it worse. I'm sure that's a very common experience, but I can see very clearly now how I added to the pain and the confusion and the emotional dysregulation that she was in. So I think we left off with, we had separated, and we were talking about the nanny taking the kids out of daycare. So I don't want to go into all the details, but what I will say, so this is, it's really challenging not to tell this from my point of view. And obviously, like I said at the very beginning of this thing, I'm trying to tell it from Cindy's point of view, but it's obviously through my eyes. So it is the story from my point of view, but I'm trying to keep it back with Cindy. So she's I don't think she was working actually during this time, if I remember correctly, for most of it. She spent most of the time on, like, the last 5 years. I would say the vast majority of it, probably 70% of it, say, she was on short-term disability with work. She would go back and not be able to work. But so I didn't know really what was happening with her too much after we separated, because we would see each other so we had the situation where she took the kids out of daycare, for example, right? That's where kind of I left off last time. And I talked about how I freaked out on her. So, during that time, she was having an incredibly challenging time coping. I didn't know this too much because, again, I didn't see her that much. Like, we only lived about a kilometer away from one another, but I tried to avoid her at all costs. And I really only wanted to see her when we had something to do with the kids, like exchanging the kids or whatever. So, I don't have a great deal of insight into what was going on in her life, other than to say the wheels were coming off, like they were continuing to come off. And I can't imagine what that must have been like for her, because, and I don't know her state of mind. She seemed very upset most of the time we talked. She was always, I mean, this isn't a pity party. This is just, this is just pointing out some of the things that were said, but, she always felt like I was failing the girls as a father and I was doing everything wrong and blah, blah, blah. So I know that there was a lot of chaos in her life because of how often the schedule changed with the kids. So because we had gotten, lawyers had gotten involved, she was very aggressive with the whole lawyer thing, in the sense that I was constantly getting letters, accusing me of all kinds of stuff and this, that, and the other thing. It was just, I see now how clearly, like, it was just a revenue generating thing for the lawyers, but it was scary as hell. But I can see how she would have been scared as well. So if she truly believed I was incompetent and she had all of this stuff going on, I can see why she wanted to defend herself with a lawyer. And she didn't believe me. She thought I was a fucking liar. She didn't trust me. She thought I had stashed all her money in offshore bank accounts. Like, think about what that must have been like for her to actually believe all that stuff. And how upsetting it would be to actually believe their husband, like, she had spent us into bankruptcy, which is a very almost bankruptcy a number of times, and it was a very common pattern of behavior for people that suffer that kind of emotional dysregulation. In her mind, I had stolen all the money and hidden it in offshore bank accounts. So, I mean, if I believed that, yeah, I would have gotten a lawyer too, for sure I would have. So, but what ended up happening was we had, when I left, we had agreed that we would spend 50-50 with the kids, and I was really flexible about it because she was working shift work and it was like 4 on, 4 off. And so, I just wanted the kids half the time and I wanted to get along with her. But throughout the course of the time we were separated, the kids it was a constant ongoing battle to have a set schedule with the kids. No matter what was agreed on, she would constantly change it. Sometimes she did it with the lawyer. Sometimes she did it with a phone call. Sometimes she did it with just not showing up with the kids on time. Sometimes being late to drop them off, but most of the time being way early. And in the time we were separated, she changed the schedule with the kids 65 times. And I used to document all of this stuff. Just, I think partially for my own sanity, but partially because I wanted to protect myself if we went to court. But during that time, I mean, if you think about what must have been going on that made her change the schedule that many times, like, it must have been just complete chaos in her life. And I know that, work was already sort of tenuous and that she was not really able to perform at work. She just couldn't handle life. And so the wheels were coming off at work, and I'm sure she was always concerned, especially being a police officer. I mean, there's a massive culture in the police that is very tribal and very, very sort of, let's call it strength based, right? Like if you're weak or you take a knee, you're out, and it's changed since then. I mean, that would have been, when this was all going on, it would have been anywhere from 13 to say 8 years ago, between 8 and 13 years ago. Culture's changed quite a bit since then. However, at the time, she was really felt ostracized. So it's just this thing she wanted to do, be a police officer in this place where she derived her identity, it was taken away from her. And she really felt it. She felt humiliated and ostracized. She felt like when she went back to work, nobody trusted her. And a lot of times she was doing desk duty, which is exceptionally humiliating. So on top of everything else, she's losing this thing that she really identified with, and it really, really damaged her sense of self. She knew who she was. She didn't know what else she would do. She felt like damaged goods. Like, she was never going to be able to do it again. She felt like so many things had happened in policing that her career was, even if she stayed in it, her career was ruined. Like, imagine all of that stuff being piled on top of this emotional dysregulation and, the relationships falling apart, not just her relationship with me, but her relationship with her friends. And, she had alienated a lot of her friends and they loved her, but they had to pull back for their own safety and their own, raising their own families, right? So, she had become increasingly isolated. Now, I didn't really know how isolated, because again, I knew she was isolated, but I always, like, when we were separated, I always imagined myself, I imagined her living this life, this great life. And I don't know, it was really weird. I didn't, when you don't know what's going on with someone, I don't know, you kind of fill in the blanks, and your own beliefs and all that kind of stuff kind of help you fill in the blanks. And sometimes the way you fill them in makes no sense. But so she was under an exceptional amount of pressure. And yeah, so anyways, when we were separated, so we just changed the schedule with the kids a lot. She changed the schedule with the kids, like, again, 65 times. And I don't know where I want to go with this, other than to say that was a repeating pattern. And so near the end, like getting closer to the end of her life, things started to get more intense, I would say, as far as, like, I can remember taking the kids out for wings. No, actually, what was I doing? I was going out for wings. And what had happened? I'm trying to think what happened. I drove by, so the kids were at daycare. Daycare ended at 6. Like, I would usually pick them up around, say, 5:15 at night. Daycare ended at 6. And I remember just actually going to get wings and driving by Cindy's house. Actually, that was kind of on the way. Or maybe it wasn't on the way, and I just drove by her house. Anyways, there was nobody home. The lights were out. And I thought that was weird, because she was supposed to pick up the kids. And the daycare was close. But so I went for wings, and then daycare called me and said nobody came to pick up the kids. I'm like, oh my God. Like, so I just zipped over and picked up the kids, and tried to get a hold of Cindy, and I couldn't get a hold of her. And she ended up calling me later, and, being all frazzled and saying, they got into an accident at work and blah, blah, blah. I didn't know the details. So I said, oh my God, I hope, are you okay, or whatever. And so I ended up keeping the kids. And what I know now is, at her funeral, she actually had gotten into an accident at work. She went off the road, and she tried to lie about what happened. She said she was, got run off the road. I found some of the stuff out afterwards. I found out some of the stuff before she died, but I found out some of the stuff after. She said she had, someone had run her off the road. And then she told her work, something was really fishy about the story. So she told her work that she had an anxiety attack at work and lost control of her car. And at her funeral, what some of her coworkers told me is they believe she was trying to kill herself. Because if you died on the line of duty, it's very financially advantageous for the family. Right. So I think it was, in her mind, I think it was a way of setting us up for some kind of financial security. I don't even know what those details would have been, but regardless, I didn't find that out until her funeral. But I did find out from her that she had an anxiety attack sometime between then and the time that she passed away. So we're into like December now, just before Christmas, and she died in March. So then what ended up happening was, I got a letter from her, a text from her, saying that I need to take some time away, and my doctor thinks it's best. And I remember being concerned, but also being really relieved, because if she went away, that meant I didn't have to worry about her. Like, I didn't have to be around her for however long she was going away for, whatever going away even meant. And so I feel like I should move here, because the light is getting pretty bright behind me. And I think I'm going to do that. And I'll let you keep talking while I do it. So, yeah, so so anyways, I got a text from her that said she needed to take some time off and go away. And again, I didn't really know what that meant. Oh, sorry. The lighting is a little yellowish here. Actually, bear with me. I'm just going to go grab my light. I'm coming. Now I'm going to grab my tea. So, okay, I'm back. So she said she had to go away. Now, again, not having really too much of a sense of what was going on with her. And I know that might sound crazy right now because I've just told you all this stuff, but I had very limited insight into it at the time. And she was very protective of it, right? Because she felt shame. She felt like I was trying to completely screw her over with the kids. So she felt like she had nobody at this point because she didn't want to tell work what was going on with her. And she certainly did not want to tell me what was going on with her because if she did, she was afraid I was going to use that against her to try to get the kids. And you know what? I probably would have. But honestly, what I was trying to do was prevent her from taking the kids from me because those were things that she made threats about. Those were things that she made threats about. So I would have used it against her, absolutely. So she was right. And so that fear was legitimate, and it made her feel more isolated and more alone and more terrified. So, you know, after this accident, I guess the wheels had really started. I keep saying that stupid expression, but things had really gone downhill from a very low point to begin with. So she talked to her doctor and she went off on stress leave again, which is something she had done a number of times for quite long periods of time. And I remember her then reaching out to me and being sort of conciliatory in the sense that she wanted to talk to me and she actually sounded friendly, which was really, really odd to me. And anyways, to make a long story short, she had decided, I think in January of 2010, that she needed to go to India. And she had gotten her grandmother to give her some part of her inheritance or all of her inheritance, or just really to pay for it, because she wanted to do yoga instructor training. And for her, this was a way of obviously trying to find something else to do that was not policing. And I give her a tremendous amount of credit because for the state of mind that she was in, which was crushingly depressed, the fact that she was able to do this, even consider it, was mind-boggling to me because this was a massively intensive undertaking, like flying across the world for 6 weeks. So anyways, she tells me this. She comes over to my house and she tells me this, and she's actually civil, I guess. And, you know, she needed help from me to organize it, like booking plane tickets. And I was happy to do that, actually, for a couple of reasons. The first reason was that I was going to be able to get rid of her for 6 weeks. Like, God, what a relief, man. And just have the kids to myself and not have to worry about the drama. But the second one was I wanted her to find something other than policing too, because I knew she wasn't going to be able to go back to it. And I knew that was devastating for her and she needed something else. So anyways, got that all sorted out. And it was like a couple days of like being friends. And I know that was important to her too. And I remember talking with her and having this conversation where we weren't the enemy. And it was unbelievably reassuring. So anyway, she goes to India and she's there for 6 weeks. And we had a few Skype calls during that time. And I remember her saying, like, she was very upset on the phone. And she was saying, you know, how crushingly depressed she was. And they were doing yoga for 3 hours a day in some remote place in India. And, you know, how it was just an incredible accomplishment for somebody in her emotional and mental state that she was able to organize this and accomplish it and get it done. It was really something else. But I could tell she was in a very bad headspace when she was over there. I don't know for how much of the time, but the times that we talked, it was really pretty bad. So she came home from India. We went and actually picked her up at the airport with the kids, and that was nice. Now, during this time that she was gone, I had gotten the Children's Aid Society involved because she was in a terrible state of mind before she left, and I was concerned. I had talked to her, like I said, I had talked to her on the phone with all her history, I was really afraid of. I was trying to protect the kids, and I just didn't really. I didn't expect them to do anything, to be honest with you, but I wanted to keep them in the loop about what was going on with her because. So, anyways, I told her that when she came back from India because I did that when she was gone, and so you can imagine what that must have been like for her. Oh, this husband, this guy that I was married to or am married to, trying just as soon as I go away, this is what went through her head, and I can understand why. As soon as I go away, he like tricks me into, or super supportive into trying to go on, get me to go away. And as soon as I'm gone, he tries to, fuck me over basically and take the kids away from me. So you can imagine what that did to her, and it just confirmed everything she already believed about me. And it was just another example about that she had another piece of evidence that she had nobody left that she could trust, and she was livid and hurt, and she took the kids, and then she wouldn't give them back. And this was 1 week to the day before she died. So she came back on March 19th and she died on March 26th. So she took the kids home with her. Like, she was so fucking mad, oh my God, about the whole thing. And so she took the kids home with her, and she was supposed to have them till Wednesday or something like that. And so the kids had gymnastics. So she got home on a Friday, and I think it was on the Sunday, I saw her on Sunday morning, and she was an absolute mess. And I think she was completely drunk, actually. And I didn't know that. I didn't click in. I actually let her take the kids. So she was at gymnastics, and she was laying on this bench at gymnastics, and she was mumbling shit to me that was like, in some ways she was trying to be nice. But in some ways she was trying to be nice, but but she was basically incoherent. And I can't believe I let her take the kids. I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't, like, it was like 9 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't imagine that she was drunk. I thought she had jet lag. But yeah, anyways, and I should back up a bit and say, before she went to India, actually, she called me to come over to her house. And this was a very important moment, actually. So she had moved. She could no longer afford the house. She wouldn't sell it. And I had been paying the mortgage for a long time, as well as paying the mortgage on my own place I was living, because my thinking was, I want her. I don't know how, she's not capable. Like, she's not capable of taking care of all this shit right now. And I don't want our credit, like, I don't want my credit rating to be ruined. So, but anyways, I can only do that for so long because I was plummeting into debt. And so she ended up taking over the mortgage. And because of the way she spent money and managed money, she was unable to afford it anymore. And so she sold the house and moved out to a town 20 minutes away from where we lived. It made no sense why she went out there. It was another thing. She didn't know anybody. She was alone, isolated, and drinking heavily, And so one day she called me and she said, finally, this is before she went to India, so I'm kind of going all over the map. I just thought of this part of the story. But she called me up and she said, I know that I'm bipolar and I'm hallucinating. I haven't been at work since, so this would have been in February. I haven't been at work since December, which was when she got into that accident. And I need you to come out here. And so I went out, and I was scared shitless. And I walked in, I knocked on her door, and I saw a broken human being. Any spark of anything, she was such a vivacious, charismatic person, that was gone. It was absolutely gone. And she let me in, but she seemed completely lucid. She just seemed like her old self. And I was probably there for about 3 hours, and she fell on her hands and knees and begged me to take her back. And it was awful. It was one of the most awful experiences of my life, because it wasn't not going to happen. And I tried to explain to her that I wanted her to be happy, and I wanted us to be friends, and I wanted to raise the kids together, and blah, 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 but that we were not getting back together. And she laid on the floor and sobbed about having become her mother and being a failure as a mother and a wife, and that she knew that I was a good person and all that kind of stuff. And it was a very emotional time for us together at that time. And there was a period where she laid down. We sat on the couch. I sat on the couch and she laid with her head on my lap, and I just stroked her hair. And it was very intimate and peaceful and uh, just a powerful moment. But she was so alone, and she was trying to get me to go out and get alcohol and cigarettes, and um, I just obviously wouldn't do that. But man, I lost, just kind of took me back to this moment. I lost my train of thought there. But oh, so I wanted her to get help. Like I wanted her to go to the hospital because she was in a bad state. Like she seemed lucid, but I mean, she was low, very, very low. And she wouldn't go to the hospital. So, and I knew that I couldn't make her. So I remember though, like her feeling alone and isolated and paranoid. And I remember leaving her house just thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen to her? And so anyways, jump ahead now back to where we were. So she took the kids. Now she was supposed to bring the kids back on Wednesday and she didn't. And then she's supposed to bring them back on Thursday and she didn't. And she just kept saying, she was back to her old way of being confrontational. And, I wasn't going to make a big deal, but I mean, for crying out loud, she had not seen the kids for 6 weeks. But then on Friday, March 26th, she dropped the kids off at daycare. And judging by her bank records, after she went to, I think it was Home Depot, and bought all the shit for her tubing and duct tape and all of that stuff. And sometime around dinner time on Friday, March 26th, right around after, like when I was picking the kids up from daycare, she, one second here. Sorry, I had to tell my dog to stop whining. Oops, am I muted? No, I'm not muted. She decided that was the day to end her own life. And with that, she was alone. She was ashamed. She had ruined her career. This is how she was thinking about it. She had failed as a mother. She had failed as a wife. She had failed as a human being, as a friend. And there was nothing left for her. And it's, yeah. And I used to say that she took her own life because she wanted to give us our freedom. She wanted to end her pain. But the truth is, those things are probably true. But the truth is, who knows? Who can really know? And then, after she died, I found out more things about her and her life that I didn't know in all the time that we had been together. And I realized just how much of a pattern this abuse and these mental health issues, how long they had been a pervasive pattern in her life, and how much she had tried to outrun them and tried to bury them and tried to move past them in a way that was truly heroic. It was doomed in the end, but it was heroic because she took a horrific upbringing and she tried to make goodness come from it, but she never confronted the thing that caused her so much pain. And so when I look at what she was able to accomplish, it just blows me away. She never stopped working. She never stopped trying. Even when she was at her absolute worst, at her lowest, she fought. She she just kept trying to get better. But how long can you go on? Like she didn't know that it was her past that had caused, like, her traumatic past that was causing her pain today. Nobody ever asked her. Nobody told her to look at it. Nobody he said what happened to you. All people did was give her medication and electroshock therapy and intervention when she was suicidal, and she was trying her fucking best to follow all those instructions to the letter, but they were never the thing. They were never going to heal her. So she did the best she could, and she was always doing the best she could. And that's why I wanted to tell her story to the best of my ability, because it's a story of pain, but it's a story of love, and it's a story of contribution, and it's a story of motherhood. Because I will tell you, when she was well and she was with our daughters, she was an incredible mother. She loved those kids so much. She was so devoted to them, which made it just shows you how powerful these demons can be. Because when you think about the fact that she moved away from her kids that were less than 2 and less than 1 for 4 or 5 months, 3 hours away, and hardly saw them at all. Think about that. Someone that was completely devoted to their kids, and the grip mental health had on her was so powerful that she abandoned them and her husband, because what her mind was telling her was important to do was something different, she was really powerless to stop it. So, I don't know what else to say. I've probably been rambling on too long, but she was an amazing human being. And I think it's important to acknowledge that when I look at the life that I have now, the girls that we have, my wife, how I've grown as a human being, Cindy contributed to that, and her contributions will live on forever through me and through her kids. This experience has made me a far better person. It's made me a better father, and it's made me a better husband the second time around, a much, much better husband. Certainly not perfect, but much, much better. And, that's her legacy. Her legacy is not, pain and mental health issues. It's not that. She was dealt a horrible deck of cards and never had the tools to figure out the knowledge to figure out how to reshuffle the deck, And so when I look at what she accomplished in spite of all that, it's incredible. She became a police officer. I don't know if I said this earlier, but 4,900 people applied and 77 got on. And of course, she was one of the people that got on because she kicked ass. She was an incredibly powerful, charismatic woman. And the power she had to light up a room, it was her greatest strength, but it was also her greatest weakness as well, because she could get anybody to do anything, especially men. And when she was manic and emotionally dysregulated, she could never have any issue finding some guy that would do what she wanted, and kind of enable her behavior. Yeah, I was one of them for a while, for sure. But anyways, she, in her 38 years, she left a significant mark on this world. And it's something that I still look back on, and I am blown away by her strength and her determination, and that this got, in the end, that these demons won, just shows how powerful they truly are. And so the 16 years we spent together it was a love story. It was a story. It was a tragedy. But it was a story that many other people have shared, and I can see so clearly now how that version of me at the time was hurt, and I had very little self-awareness. I hardly developed myself as a human being. I didn't understand my emotions, and it's so clear to me how, in many cases, I made it worse, even when I was trying to make it better. There's many cases where I did a lot of the right things. I really tried my best to support her, but yeah, I mean, and so you know, I just don't want her legacy to be one of loneliness and pain, because she was so much more than that. So, but when I look at what her life became, and with the benefit of time and space and knowledge, as I'm able to, more clearly see the world through the eyes that she was seeing it with during that time, I have so much empathy for her and so much respect and so much understanding about why she did the things that she did, even though they were, might have been irrational or they made no sense, or they had terribly damaging consequences in the real world. Um, I'm better able to understand now why she was doing the things that she was doing and why they made sense to her, and that she was doing the best she could in the moment, just like we all are. And so, yeah, I guess I'll end the story there. As I've talked about a million times, I mean, that was really a phase of my story where a new phase was just beginning that would take me a long time to understand. But um, what I will say is that I am absolutely positive that Cindy was not bipolar at all. She was diagnosed as having bipolar disorder, but she was either dealing with borderline personality disorder or whatever the label was. The label doesn't really matter. What matters is that she was not broken and in need of fixing. She was hurt and in need of healing. But all anybody ever tried to do was fix her, and that's including me, including her doctor, including her psychiatrist, all of those people. Everybody tried to fix her, and she's never really broken. Um, and that's a powerful thing to think about, right? And that's why I do the Mental Health Warriors podcast, because I don't want anybody else to have to be told that they're broken too, and that the path to fixing or managing uh, is medication or whatever. There's healing that can happen. There's a lot of ways to do it. But the first step is understanding that you're actually hurt in the first place. And so that's been one of Cindy's legacies. So yeah, I guess I'll end it there and just say, from the time I was 19 till the time that I was 37 years old, Cindy played a massive role in my life. Um, she helped me grow as a human being uh, a lot. We grew up together. Um, and now that it's been 8 years, I feel that I understand that time together more now than I ever have. I understand the gifts that Cindy gave to the world more now than I ever have. I understand the gifts she gave to me more now than I ever have. And I think that's maybe why it's important um, that I try to honor her legacy in some way. So um, that was the best version of the story that I could tell. And I know that I got wrapped up at points in talking about me, but I tried to do that just to add some context. But she was a great person, and she won't be the first person that takes her own life. And she wasn't the first, and she won't be the last. She won't be the first. She wasn't the first person to deal with mental health issues, and she won't be the last. But if her story and the telling of it can maybe help somebody else in some way, then I guess that's what it's all about. So, Cindy, you are an amazing mother. I sometimes wonder if you are looking down, and if you are, just know that the girls are fine. They remind me of you, and thank you for everything that you have given me and that you have given us. And I love you.